Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Kim.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration.
If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restoretheglory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory.
Hey, Bob. Good to see you again. We are back again. We are here in our series on judgment, mercy, and healing. So listeners, if you're popping into this episode because we came up with some really catchy title, we really encourage you to go back and listen to the last episode because it sets a context to where we're going. So Bob, last episode, we broke down the concept of judgment and something, if you think about non-Christians and the secular culture, this is like their mantra to the Christian. You're so judgmental, and yet we have to judge. Like everyone does it. It's impossible not to judge. But we were nuancing last time what is good judgment, like objective truth versus subjective truth, and how judgment and healing, you can judge a person from your heart, and that can be a block to healing, et cetera, et cetera. So another reference, just listeners, this will be really amplified if you go back and listen to the Anatomy of a Wound series, where we talk a particular section about the types of beliefs, one of which is judgment. So, Bob, thoughts as we shift over from judgment to mercy? Any reflections from last time?
I think it's really important because we live with this every day. This is our everyday reality for every one of us. It's like, how do we live in the truth of who God is, which is right judgment, which is what brings healing is right judgment and the conforming our lives to the truth. And what blocks our healing process is wrong judgment, our own wrong judgments, our prideful judgments towards ourselves, towards other people, and all of our shame and self-hatred that comes out of that really becomes a barrier to God's mercy and God's love. Wow. And so the true judgment opens the door of our hearts to receive it, because we're convicted of sin and we're convicted of righteousness as the Holy Spirit does. But the wrong kind of judgment blocks us from giving and receiving mercy and therefore destroys the process of healing.
Bob, it just tweaked me like in a good way when you said right judgment, because I paused for a moment and I said, that's the experience of Eden, was right judgment. And so what was present there was complete truth constantly. And that's what we're made for. And so judgment did exist pre-fall, right? So just to give people like a little thinking point there, like, oh, because judgment has such a bad connotation. Right. But another way to say it would be noticing reality, noticing the truth, noticing reality.
Yeah, it's called original justice, right? That's original justice.
So everything is in truth. Everyone's operating in truth. And so that's the harmony, I guess you could say, of everything that's going along. And what's interesting is that when you get outside of truth, the truth of the human person, the truth of who we're designed to be, the truth of love and God's intentionality with what we're made to be, that's when wounds happen.
Yes.
And then as we judge the truth or lie of a wound. So for example, when you're a kid, you're very vulnerable. And so you can be told something that's not true. And so then you judge yourself to be something that's not true. Now you have a wound problem going on. So mercy is like this beautiful, I was going to say banging on the door, and that's not, that's the wrong tone to it. But this persistent desire for healing is something that I'm like, right, no wonder judgment and mercy go together, because it's an element of mercy is bringing in what is true.
Yes.
And that's what's healing. So anyway, I know we're going to break down a lot of this stuff, but I just went, right. It's this restoration of what is true.
Yeah. If I can use this in a situation that I ran into all the time in therapy, which is one spouse in a marriage
Yes.
breaking the covenant by infidelity.
Yes.
Right? And if the spouse who was betrayed
Yeah.
and the spouse who does the betraying are both in denial about the truth, this is okay. Like back in the 70s, just swinging. This is just okay.
Right.
Right? And then there's total disregard for the impact in each of their souls and in their marriage and in their relationship. Right? That's an example of denying right judgment. But it's the right judgment that says this was a violation not only of your relationship with God,
yes,
but of our relationship. And the impact of this is major, and we can't repair until we're both willing to acknowledge the truth of that.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
However, if the couple then gets stuck
Yes.
and says, I'm not going to forgive you, that what you've done is unforgivable. There's no mercy for this. The wounds are too deep. You're just banished,
Yes.
banished from my life. Then without that mercy, there can be no healing. But the mercy triumphs over the judgment, as St. Paul said, or St. James says.
That's right. Yeah.
When the judgment is true. But when the judgment is false, then there's no mercy.
Oh, yeah.
I've watched that over and over and over again in therapy of people wrestling with the justice and the injustice that's being done, and then the mercy that comes from the Lord first and then with each other. And it takes a while for that process to occur.
So listeners, you probably need to pause and hit that little thing on your app that goes back 15 seconds and keep clicking it to re-listen to what Bob just said, because in a nutshell, that was very helpful. The articulation of right judgment and wrong judgment and the connection to mercy and the necessity for judgment to be present for healing, because judgment is about what is true. So the example, I know exactly the story you're talking about. You have almost polar extremes usually in an infidelity counseling situation, where what might be called blind forgiveness, and it's usually couched as this virtuous thing, but it actually dismisses the right judgment of it. And so then I'm speaking freely, I'm not thinking of anybody in particular, then, and here's a tough phrase, then the mercy is cheap.
Right.
At that point, because there's no real sorrow or pain that's being restored, where the presence and life of God comes into. If it didn't really matter, then the mercy's cheap. And yet I love the nuance you're saying is what can happen is that swings to the other side, where you acknowledge this was a major grievance and it shattered our core of who we are in this relationship. Then you can get stuck in, and that's who we are in perpetuity. There's no hope now, and nothing can be done. You are always an adulterer.
Right.
And the scarlet letter goes on symbolically, and nothing can be restored.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That's really helpful.
Yeah. And if you look at this now in terms of the culture, where the culture wants tolerance for everything.
Yes.
Then it's really ironic, because it's, woe to you who call evil good and good evil, because there can never be anything put right if we obfuscate the truth of the reality of who we are. If we continue to deny the reality of who God is and who we are as human beings, and say that any kind of sin is okay,
yes,
whether that's sexual sin or any kind of sin, abortion, murder,
yes, divorce,
anything that violates the dignity of what God has established.
Yes.
And we say, now this is good, like same-sex love is good.
Mm-hmm.
Cutting off people's genitals in the name of healing is good.
Right, right.
All that is wrong judgment, first of all.
Yes.
And it's false mercy. And it's not merciful at all, because it creates deeper and deeper wounds in everybody who's involved.
That's so true. Again, listeners, 15-second back thing. Like we could stop the episode right now and just sit with this, because I want to keep almost repeating it, because this principle is absolutely essential to real healing. And this is where you and I have talked about this in previous episodes. And this is, to me, where I would say you and I in particular in our relationship and those similar to us really, I think, move forward in the healing department because of a sound anthropology. And this is where you go to your modern secular schools and get your degrees in these fields, and they do not honor objective truth of the human person. This judgment and mercy thing is all twisted up and mangled, and then you go out and try to help someone, but they're still objectively a human person. It's like a car. Like, if you don't know what it is and what it needs to thrive, it will not work well. And if you just go, oh, don't be so, like, water's as good as gas. They're both liquid.
Right.
No, it has to be gas. And well, but oil is in the same family as gas. Just pour a bunch of oil in there.
Yeah.
Still won't work, right?
Yeah. Love is love, right? Love is love.
Right. Right. Love, it doesn't matter. Love is love. Whatever you feel, whatever you want. And that's, one of the issues when you talk about real healing is it can't simply be based in how you feel. It has to be healing is always rooted in what is true.
Right.
And so if you remove the truth, which involves judgment, then your mercy is cheap and healing doesn't occur, and you actually end up more wounded in the process. I've heard it so many times from clients, you probably have too, where I went to this person and they said, oh, just go ahead and masturbate.
Right.
That's normal.
Right.
That's appropriate. I read something the other day. It is not this guy. Okay, Bob. So this is going to get crazy for a second. Like this is the craziness of the culture.
Yeah.
So trigger warning to people with sexual addiction. There's a New York representative who's trying to get into office or got into office or is lobbying to get into office. One of his principles is the condoning of sex workers, like the positive view of prostitution. And he says, I saw it on Exodus Cry, which is a great account to look for they're trying to take down the pornography industry. So love that account and those people. So they were talking about this guy. And as an attempt to promote positive views of prostitution, he decided to make a porn video as a representative, as part of his campaign.
Wow.
And saying to people, see how positive I am? Look at how positive I am. I had to experience what it's like to be with a prostitute so that I could then help them.
Wow.
And it's riddled. And he goes on to say, I care about women's rights.
Right.
And abortion should be totally available. And he just went through all of this stuff, and it was full of wrong judgment.
Yeah. Wow.
And his platform was merciful.
Yeah.
I'm being kind to the prostitutes.
Yeah.
Without an adequate anthropology, that seems and could be conceived as normal. And you could go, I think he might be merciful.
Yeah.
And yet we look at it and go, God, please, like literally, God, please bless that man.
Yeah.
Because his heart is very far from hope and life. Anyway.
Wow. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And that's the water we swim in as a culture. That's becoming more and more norm.
Right.
And you go dig behind that whole scene.
Yes.
And this guy probably has a lifelong pornography addiction.
Probably
has been frequenting prostitutes. Who knows? Probably was sexually abused himself. And the women that he's trying to hire as workers were probably sexually abused from the time they were young children.
Yeah.
Lived that out in their life and are suffering so deeply in the denigration and the sense of worthlessness and all of that. In this attempt, he's totally blind to those realities. He's totally not acknowledging any of those realities. Yes. And so what's merciful to those women, what's merciful to him is totally different.
Right. To me, it's an obvious, and yet it's not as obvious anymore these days, but it's an obvious example of right judgment and mercy. Yeah. When you don't get the right judgment right, the mercy it doesn't make sense.
And probably every one of our listeners sees it so obviously. I mean, it's probably so obvious to everyone who would be our listeners.
That's right. And yet it becomes not obvious in our stories and lives with the wound that we've suffered and the lies that we've suffered that then we miss the right judgment. So for that, it's obvious. But what about the belief that I'm unlovable? And you might go, well, I don't walk around with that thing in my head. But as Sister Miriam says, I love the phrase, you have a theology of your head and you have a theology of your heart. And they're not always in sync. Maybe she took that from somebody else, but I'm giving her the credit. So the theology of the heart could be something where I believe something about God or myself that isn't true. My judgment is wrong. And interestingly, the remedy is for truth and love to come in. And I would say that is what mercy is.
Yes.
It's this combination of truth and love entering into a situation. It doesn't deny the lie or pretend it's not true, but it offers a remedy of truth. So just quickly, just for listeners to go, what do you mean by mercy? And so I found this very helpful. I did a little bit of Googling and reading about mercy and just the philosophy of mercy and connecting it to healing. And I thought this was really good. I'm not going to remember the words right, so don't quote me, but you can find it really quickly online. There's like the Divine Mercy Institute and all these places online. One guy I was reading was Dr. Stackpole, who used to be from where I'm from in Canada. He did this little thing where he talked about the Old Testament definitions of mercy and the New Testament definition of mercy, like more the Hebrew words that were used for it and then the Greek and Latin words that were used for it. And the Hebrew words that were used for it were all of these affection phrases.
Like hesed.
Yeah, hesed. Yeah. It's like kindness, tenderness, faithfulness, steadfastness, drawing in close, affection. That was the word that they has said, that it has all those connotations to it. And then is there something you want to say with that?
No, that's...
You're smiling. No one else can see you smiling. So I can see you smiling like, ooh, Bob's got something rolling around.
Yeah.
And then the New Testament is, you know, maybe you've heard it at Mass, misericordiae. Did I say that right?
I think so.
Close enough. Yeah, close. Yeah, somebody will correct us. But anyway.
Somebody will come with right judgment if we're wrong, right?
Well said.
Mercifully, I hope.
Touche. Yeah, mercifully. Please come with truth and love. Yeah. And that's like, it has a different connotation. It almost has a different nuance to it. But when you put the Old Testament and the New Testament together, because if you know your theology, read De Verbum, the Old Testament is never done away with. It's fulfilled in the New. So both count is the simple way to say it. So in healing, we need both hesed and misericordiae.
Yeah, misericordia is literally a heart for our misery.
Yes.
That God has a heart for our misery.
Yeah, his pain at our pain.
Yeah.
Being moved by the pain and the suffering and the lack or the whatever of the other. Have you ever felt that? Have you felt misericordiae?
Oh yeah, all the time. Right?
All the time, right?
Yeah.
I knew that was the case.
Yeah,
but.
yeah. It's you're in the middle of with somebody and you just have the Father's heart just come over you.
Yeah.
Of just the pain for the other person's pain and just the love that comes for that person in that place and wanting to lift for them this place of pain in their heart.
Does any story come to mind?
Oh,
I know this is all unscripted, so
yeah, it's all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, I mean, it just happened the other day. I was just in conversation with somebody, and as they were sharing their pain, it's just like my heart went out to them in that place of pain, and just I was with them, suffering with them, but also wanted to lift it from them.
Yes. None of this is scripted. So as I'm asking you the question, I genuinely am asking because I feel like there's something here for us to get an experience of mercy in a wound. And one comes to mind that I had not scripted. I was telling you before the mics were on, Bob, I'm not sure where we're headed, but right now I'm like, I know where we're headed, but it's great. We're going down this road. I was in a counseling session with Heather for our marriage. We basically are professional clients. We're always there. Like we've got frequent client miles. And so we're in a session and the therapist is having me share about my story as a child. And one of the pieces of my story as a baby being, when I was young, my mom had to go away, and then an early exposure to pornography. Those are the two emphases. And I'm sharing this as if it's just normal, because it is to me. It's just normal. And I'm sort of connected to it, but I'm not at all emotional. And then all of a sudden, I hear sniffling And I look, and Heather and my therapist are in tears at my story, and I'm not in tears.
Yeah.
And I felt safety and care like I cannot tell you like I had ever felt it before. It was so healing.
Yep. Yep.
They were moved at my misery.
Yeah.
It was a massive breakthrough for Heather and I, because my wrong judgment was, she's not safe. She will hurt me. She'll abandon me. She'll blah, blah, blah.
She
Whatever.
doesn't
all the lies.
understand me. She's judging me. Right. Right.
Yeah. All that.
Yeah.
And in that moment, she had both the Old Testament, she had Hesed and Misericordia.
Yeah.
And I experienced like a transformation of my view of her.
Yeah.
I could see her in a totally different light.
Yeah.
And it was healing.
Yeah.
My relationship with her changed. My trust level went up, on and on.
Your own heart awareness of your own pain.
Right.
Right.
And a level, this is where the healing it's not totally done, or it wasn't like all better.
Right.
Was, oh gosh, why do I not feel that about myself?
Yeah.
And it began a process, which I'm still very much in, of having mercy on the young places in me instead of rejecting them or being bothered by them or irritated, when I feel vulnerable or whatever. It helped me go, oh, maybe that's possible.
Yeah. I see that happen. That's so big in the healing process. I shared this story, I think, before, but as you share that, it just reminds me of the experience of when I was in therapy and I was so disconnected from my pain of my dad leaving.
Yes.
And my therapist is asking me to share what it was like when my dad finally saw him after 2 years and then he's gone. He's leaving again at the airport. And she asked me to stand at the airport and feel what it feels like. And I was in denial, rationalizing, all kind of stuff. And as I'm sharing, she said, "What would you want to say to your dad?" And what came out of me, this little 14-year-old, 15-year-old heart, not little, but my body was big, but my heart was little.
Yeah. Yeah.
"Dad, please don't leave."
Oh.
And when I said those words, she starts crying.
Right.
And it's like, I'm looking at her like, this is the first person that's ever felt my pain, I think, or that I was aware of.
Yes.
And I didn't feel it. I hadn't felt it yet.
Right.
But it was like her tears melting the ice around my heart, and feels really similar to what you're describing there. And what happens is this part of me, I used to look at pictures of myself at that age, and I didn't like that person at all.
Yep. Yep.
And it was the beginning of me learning to be merciful and compassionate and care about that part of my heart rather than just wall off and protect and disengage from it.
Just to help our listeners see it a bit more, I think both of us have a similar experience, and we had wrong judgment there, which embedded lies. And then these new people who were merciful, who misericordiae and Hesed was happening all in this nice, beautiful combination. And it changed us. It helped us come into right judgment, which is, well, maybe that was a big deal.
Yeah.
Maybe I am lovable, or maybe, all of those, that's where right judgment starts to kick in. And when you operate in right judgment about who you are, who others are, who God is, and you experience the peace that surpasses understanding in that, there you got healing. But it came via mercy.
Yep. And you expressed that well. It's like we're living in false judgment of ourselves.
Yes.
And in false judgment of the people who hurt us.
Right.
And the therapist in that moment, by bringing mercy, also brings truth, which is, this really was hurtful. You weren't responsible for that.
Yes.
You're not unlovable. All that happening in an instant, that it's just the power of God's love in that moment.
Yes. That's why I think for people, like when they have a healing experience, I think sometimes people have a healing experience and they move on. And my encouragement to people is, when you have encounters with God, those are like oases in a desert. and you put big signs with flashing neon arrows around them. So in your walk through the valley of the shadow of death and the struggles of life, hopefully you can see these indicators in your life where you've deeply experienced God and can receive him and go back and remember and recall and be in those spaces and places again, because they're still alive. And that's one of the crazy things about healing, is that when Jesus comes into a memory, you can actually go back to that memory and more healing can take place.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people go, oh, Jesus came in, I felt some relief, or in me in that session, like they cried, wow, that made me feel better, all done.
Right.
Nope, not all done. Like he's inexhaustible. Like he keeps pouring it out in the moment. He doesn't end. The font doesn't go dry, you know? And so we can keep receiving.
The mercies are new every moment.
Yeah.
Not just every morning, every moment.
Yeah.
And that mercy is so powerful. I don't think we've begun to comprehend his mercy. I just think it's so beyond us.
I agree that I would say for me, in my view of God, his judgment is way easier to see, understand, get in line with, almost receive.
Yeah.
Even his right judgment. And here's one of the dilemmas I think people have with God. God does judge, but not as we judge. And therefore, we regularly perceive him to be in his act of judging, and we perceive it wrongly. So we think he's wrongly judging.
Right.
And that's when images of God get distorted.
Yeah.
So the classic way of this is, oh, it's just a common thing. My dad said, "What's wrong with you, you idiot?" Or what, not even that extreme. And then we go, "Oh, that's what authority figures think of me." And then we project that onto God. And then we go, "Well, there's no way he can be merciful."
Yeah.
And yet, if you go read Divine Mercy, Heather was mentioning something the other day, and she said, "This is crazy. Have you ever heard this?" And then she reads from one of the, I guess it'd be an apparition with St. Faustina and Jesus. And Jesus said, "I long for people to snuggle into my heart and mercy." And she was like, "Have you ever heard Jesus say the word snuggle?" And I was like, it's so tender.
Yeah.
And that's like just one of the many, many things he said in his relationship with St. Faustina. And yeah.
One of the things I love in the Gospels is to contemplate, and the popes tell us this all the time, to contemplate Jesus' gaze. It's like with a woman of Samaria.
Yes.
Right? How did he look at her? When he talked about the series of Peter, how did he look at Peter when he denied him? As the woman who was caught in adultery, how did he look at the woman caught in adultery? Zacchaeus, when he looked up in the tree, how did he look at Zacchaeus? And why did it change their life?
That's the right question.
Yeah. And it didn't change their life just because he told them the truth.
Thank you. And that's a critical part of healing that I think, where healing can get narrowed and almost mechanical. I have a lie. Jesus says the truth. I'm better.
Right.
That's so like rigid. And it's like looking at a flower and saying, oh, there are petals and photosynthesis makes this occur. And that's true. And that's necessary. You remove that, dead flower. But there's a nuance and beauty. Bob, how many, I imagine, I'm assuming, we've probably heard it hundreds, thousands of times, where you're working with somebody and they're working through some issue, and Jesus comes into a situation but doesn't necessarily say anything. And people can get thrown by that. Like, well, he's not saying anything. Nothing's happening. Is he there? Well, yeah, I sense that he's there. And the perception of heart is that's inadequate. His presence is inadequate. And I'm imagining, well, I'm curious what you do in these situations. I often say, would you look at him? And right there, what's really beautiful is sometimes they can't, which is an indicator of his gentlemanly kindness and respect. He knows getting right up in their face is too much. So he makes himself present, knowing I'm ready to have a greater intimacy when you are.
Yeah.
and I'm with you, you know? And if you think about it, wounds are experiences that we extract lies from. Healing is supposed to be experiences that we extract truth from. And the experience is intended to be the centerpiece of the healing, because truth is a person, not just a concept.
Right.
And that's what makes it relational. And if you don't have relationship, you're missing components of the human person. Thoughts, ideas?
Yeah, what's coming to my mind as you're speaking is a story. And I sometimes give this at conferences, and it's in my book, Real Suffering. And it's a guy I call Patrick. It's not his real name. I call Patrick in the book.
Yeah.
Won't go into the whole story, but his dad beat him mercifully. And
mercilessly.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, not mercifully.
No, thank you. So thank you for the right judgment there.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I was jumping ahead of myself here with Jesus.
Yeah, you know where it's headed. Yeah.
And when Jesus came into the memory with him and his dad right after his dad had violently beat him, Jesus came and put his hand on his dad's shoulder.
And so Patrick's looking at this, Jesus touching the dad.
Patrick is outraged that Jesus would go to his dad and not to him.
Right.
But he's outraged that Jesus is not condemning him, scolding him, retaliating against him.
Yes.
Shaking him.
Right.
All the things that he wanted to do with his dad.
Yeah.
But as soon as his dad touched his shoulder, and the look that that Jesus had, as soon as Jesus touched his dad's shoulder,
yes,
and the look that he saw in Jesus' eyes towards his dad, immediately he went from holding on to this rage and anger towards his dad to this mercy. It was like in Jesus' gaze for his father, in Jesus' hand on his father's shoulder.
Right.
He was able to internalize Jesus' mercy for his father, and it unlocked his healing.
Wow. We've done enough events together. I know where this is going. That's not the full story, though, is it?
That's not the full story, no.
But that'll be a teaser. Maybe we'll come back to the full, because the full story is crazy. That's just
the full story is amazing. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. But that's a great example of gaze and experience being healing as opposed to just correcting judgment.
Yes.
Right. And mercy is the both of those together. Bob, what's the quote? Because at the events and stuff, we say this all the time, like, love is what heals. And I can see the workbook in my mind and all the various, like, what are some of those, just to give anchoring points for folks about love is what heals? It's like Pope Benedict seems to say it all the time, is what's in my mind. But anything come to mind about just other anchoring points around love?
Yeah, what Pope Benedict says is, anyone who hunts to heal man must see him in his wholeness, and his only healing can be God's love. That only God's love can bring the healing.
Yes.
And, we talk a lot about it's the distortion of love or the absence of love that wounds us. And so it's only a positive experience of love that heals us.
Yes.
And that love sees us for who we are.
Right judgment.
And loves us as we are. Mercy.
Yes. So, Bob, this reminds me of Father Jacques Philippe, one of our favorite authors. So what we're saying here reminds me of this. He has a book where it's priestly fatherhood. And so he's writing to priests, but he has this section where he talks about, without fatherhood, there is no mercy. And he basically breaks down and has us do this like mental thought experiment with, imagine the prodigal son story with the father's not there. And it's kind of this jarring, whoa. And he goes through and it's like, there's no one to pardon him, no one to love him, no one to tell him in spite of what you've done. I'm reading little sections of it. He goes on, like, we can't absolve ourselves of our errors, even with an army of psychologists trying to take away our guilt. Come on. And then he goes, I have nothing against psychologists, quite the contrary. They often do excellent work, but they cannot forgive sins.
Yeah.
Isn't that true? So he's linking this concept, and then he says, without the presence of the merciful Father. So we're linking healing and mercy here. And this is Father Jacques Philippe quote. He says, without the presence of the merciful Father, we are delivered up to our faults without any possible remedy. There would be no forgiveness of error or sin, no place for weakness, frailty, or failure, all of which are nonetheless part of lives. We would be, in a way, condemned to succeed at life.
Yeah. We would be condemned to face only older brothers.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Who are standing
if there's no
there
mercy
to condemn us.
I've never thought about this, but I guess you could argue that the older brother has right judgment.
Yes.
I'm
partial,
saying that loosely.
Partial right judgment, right?
Partial, yeah. Like this, look at what he did to you. He did all this, he did all this, he did all this, and those are all true.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he doesn't have mercy, so he can't come into the Father's care.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that phrase, condemned to success.
Yeah, that's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's when, if you don't have healing, which is the presence of right judgment and mercy, you're condemned to always get it right. And there's no place for your frailty or weakness. There's no place for wounds.
Yeah. Moral perfectionism.
Yeah.
Scrupulosity.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I've got to be always right. I can never be wrong. I can never fail.
Yes.
Honestly, that developed in my own heart as a teenager without a dad around.
Break it down.
Yeah. Watching my brother's failure. And being an older brother, judging him.
Do you mean Dave? Or
my brother Dave, and judging him.
Yeah.
Watching my dad's failure and judging him. Seeing my mom just in survival mode and judging her.
Wow.
All in wrong judgment because I wasn't seeing the whole person. I was partial right judgment, but wrong judgment.
Wow.
Then what are the vows inside of my own heart? Which is, I've got to be perfect. I can't fail like that. I have no place to go. Now, obviously, I had a place to go. I had God to go to. But at that point,
yeah, you didn't know that.
I'm my own judge of the situation.
Yeah. And you can't forgive your own sin.
Yeah.
To borrow Father Jacques Philippe, you're condemned to your own problems.
Yeah. So I have to succeed in school and in sports and in marriage and in family. And it's a tyrant. That moral perfectionism is a tyrant.
Oh. That's the Pharisees.
Right. That's why I always identified with their stories.
Yeah. You're like, Jesus, why are you so hard on them? They're trying. Don't be so mean.
Yeah.
You know? And he's like, well, right judgment without mercy. Like, and you hear Jesus say that. He says to the Pharisees, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Learn the meaning of this. And he's referencing Hosea. Mm-hmm. And it's this like shock to them because he does all this merciful stuff and they can't compute. They get the blue screen like on Windows in their heart and like, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah.
And how can you forgive sins? It's the Sabbath. Like there's no room for mercy in their hearts. And yet that's the remedy. And he's inviting them into it as well. Gosh, yeah, there's so much good stuff here. Bob, is there any other kind of thoughts that you had about this, or how are you feeling about where we're at? Like, do we land the plane, or is there other things?
Yeah, I think this is a great lead-in for the series that we've talked about doing after this, which is on forgiveness, because forgiveness is this perfect melding of right judgment and mercy.
Yes. And breaking down what real forgiveness is and what it's not, and people's misinterpretations and all of that, I think is really helpful. Like how, as a teaser, I'm a fan of Monsignor Rossetti, who's becoming a popular exorcist, and he gives these really cool little insights. And to me, exorcism is a version of healing, if you understand properly the definition of healing. And he just had a post where he talks about how the evil clings to unforgiveness, and it's this foothold that they get to really mess with the particular person or whatever. So great segue. So listeners, this is one of those episodes where it might feel like you drank from a fire hose, or there might be sections. And so Sister Miriam has the coolest phrase, and we say it all the time at our events that we do. She says, notice what captivates you and notice what challenges you. And I think that's probably a good thing to do. Like pause for a moment now and think through the episode and just notice what captivated me, what challenged me. And that's a good spot to linger and maybe even write down a little bit, maybe like, Dear Lord, and start just a little prayer journal of wow, this really moved me. I was really struck when they said that or this. And that's a way to move that stuff forward. So next episodes are on forgiveness with a special guest.
Yeah, another little teaser is you may all get to see Sister Miriam in the upcoming time or two.
Yeah, maybe that will occur. We'll see. We'll see if a new voice comes along.
Yeah.
Bob, it seems like this is a good place to land. How about we'll land the plane here?
I feel like, yep.
Yeah, I agree. And again, this is just a beautiful, powerful drawing out. And we've got some really fun episodes coming up. Like Bob and I always say, we never have a problem with ideas for topics. We've had some cool things come in from listeners about, oh, guys, would you please address this or that, like idea, all kinds of ideas. So we appreciate you being with us. We appreciate your support. You can check us out on Patreon and other things. But really our hope and desire is that you would experience mercy and healing. So until next time, God bless you guys, and we'll talk soon.